There is a small island off the northwest coast of Scotland, 1 mile long, half a mile wide, that the British government purchased in 1942 and did not return to its original owner for 48 years. The land itself was the reason, not the geography, not the timber, not any strategic elevation. The soil. What was done to the soil on Grunard Island between 1942 and 1943 made it, by the government's own assessment, unfit for human habitation for a minimum of 100 years. They were off by about 50 years, but only because someone eventually decided to try very hard to fix it. The story of Grunard is not a story about a weapon that was fired in battle. It is a story about a weapon that was tested on empty ground, killed everything it was supposed to kill, and then refused to stop. A contamination that outlasted the war, outlasted the government that created it, outlasted the careers of every scientist who designed it, and sat quietly in the Scottish dirt while the world moved on. To understand why Britain ended up poisoning its own territory, you have to go back to 1940, the period when German forces had swept through France, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and the Netherlands in roughly 6 weeks. Britain stood largely alone. Winston Churchill's government was running military contingency plans that in peacetime would have been considered the work of lunatics. Biological warfare was one of them. The man most directly responsible for Britain's anthrax program was Paul Fildes, a bacteriologist working at Portondown, the government's top-secret research facility on Salisbury Plain. Fildes had spent years studying Bacillus anthracis, the bacterium that causes anthrax, and he understood its properties with the kind of intimacy that only comes from years of deliberate, careful work with something capable of killing you in 72 hours. Churchill reportedly called Fildes the man who will win the war for us. That statement has not aged well. Anthrax, as a biological agent, has characteristics that made it extraordinarily appealing to a wartime weapons program. The bacterium forms spores-hardy, almost architectural structures that can survive in soil for decades without a living host. They do not need food. They do not need water. They wait. When inhaled in sufficient concentration, the spores germinate inside the respiratory tract, releasing toxins that cause hemorrhagic mediastinitis essentially. The lymph nodes and tissues in the chest cavity fill with fluid and collapse. The progression from inhalation to death, in untreated cases, runs between 1 and 5 days. The case fatality rate for inhalation anthrax without aggressive treatment exceeds 80%. In 1942, there was no treatment. Fildes and his team at Portondown developed what they called the Type F bomblet, a small 5-pound device packed with a liquid anthrax slurry. The individual bomb was not impressive to look at, about the size of a large thermos. The mechanism was simple. On impact, the casing would shatter, dispersing the slurry as a fine aerosol across the surrounding area. Alone, one bomblet was a localized hazard, but the delivery concept involved loading 5 million of them into modified RAF Lancaster bombers, 22 bomblets per standard cluster bomb, each Lancaster carrying roughly 600 of them, and carpet bombing agricultural regions of central Germany. The operation had a name: Operation Vegetarian. The target was not German soldiers. The target was German cattle. The specific plan, drafted in 1943 by Fildes' team in coordination with the Special Operations Executive, called for the contamination of German grazing land across a zone stretching from the Rhine to the Elbe. The cattle would graze on anthrax-contaminated grass. The cattle would die. German food production, already strained by wartime rationing, would collapse. And any farmer, any veterinarian, any slaughterhouse worker who came into contact with infected animals would face a secondary exposure risk that the planners factored in as, and I am using their documented language here, acceptable collateral effect. 5 million bomblets were actually manufactured. They were stored at Portondown, ready for deployment, and were never used because by the time the program reached operational readiness in the spring of 1944, the strategic picture had shifted. The Allied invasion of Normandy was 3 months away. Killing German cattle was no longer the priority. The 5 million bomblets were quietly incinerated at the end of the war. But before Operation Vegetarian reached that stage, the weapons needed field testing. Grunard Island was selected in the spring of 1942. It sat in Grunard Bay, accessible by boat, isolated from the Scottish mainland by roughly half a mile of open water, and its small resident population, primarily a farming family, was evacuated and compensated. The government acquired the island under wartime emergency powers. They told almost no one what they intended to do there. The first test took place in July 1942. A group of sheep were tethered at measured distances from a central detonation point. A single Type F bomblet was detonated upwind. The scientists, watching from a boat offshore through binoculars, recorded the results. Within 3 days, all sheep within roughly 50 yards of the detonation point were dead. The anthrax spores had dispersed exactly as the aerosol models predicted. Further tests followed through 1942 and into 1943, varying distances, varying wind conditions, varying cluster configurations. Each test produced the same result. The weapon worked. Every sheep exposed within the calculated lethal radius died of inhalation anthrax within the expected window. What the scientists did not fully account for, or perhaps underweighted in their models, was soil persistence. After the sheep died, their carcasses were burned. The surface was visually cleared, but the spores had already penetrated the topsoil. Bacillus anthracis spores in soil do not disperse randomly. They bind to soil particles, particularly in areas with specific pH levels and organic content. Grunard's soil was, by chemical accident, nearly ideal for long-term spore preservation. The island had been, in effect, permanently inoculated. By 1943, the British government knew it had a problem. A post-war assessment confirmed that the topsoil of Grunard Island contained viable anthrax spores across a significant portion of its surface area. The island was posted with warning signs. Access was prohibited. A Royal Navy vessel made periodic patrols to ensure no unauthorized landings, and the island sat there, through 1945, through the 1950s, through the Cold War, through the 1960s, when a new generation of scientists at Portondown quietly ran fresh soil samples and confirmed the spores were still viable, still capable of causing disease. Through the 1970s, when the British government still had no practical solution. There is a particular detail from 1981 that most people have never heard. A group calling itself Dark Harvest, later identified as individuals connected to Scottish nationalist and anti-nuclear movements, made a covert landing on Grunard Island, collected a quantity of contaminated soil, and deposited packages of it near the gates of Portondown and outside the Conservative Party conference in Blackpool. The message was explicit. If the government could create this contamination, it was responsible for ending it. The packages were intercepted. No one was infected. But the government's position that the island was safely isolated and the public had nothing to worry about was suddenly, publicly, and embarrassingly complicated. That pressure, combined with 2 decades of inconclusive internal debate, finally moved the Ministry of Defense to fund a serious decontamination program. If you were a field scientist, handed that assignment in 1986 knowing what the island was, knowing what was in the soil, knowing that every previous assessment had concluded remediation was essentially impossible, would you have believed the project could actually work? Military historians and biosafety researchers still debate whether what followed was a genuine scientific success or a politically necessary declaration of success. The distinction matters. The decontamination of Grunard Island began in 1986 under contract to a private firm. The method was blunt. 280 tons of formaldehyde solution, diluted in seawater, were pumped across the island's surface and into the topsoil using a network of perforated pipes. The process was repeated over multiple seasons. Topsoil in the most heavily contaminated zones, primarily around the original test sites, was physically removed and incinerated. Sheep were reintroduced as biological monitors in 1987. They did not die. The British government formally declared Grunard Island decontaminated on the 24th of April 1990. The island was returned to the heirs of its original owners for the sum of £500, the same price the government had paid to acquire it in 1942. The warning signs came down. The Royal Navy patrol ended. Independent scientists reviewing the decontamination data have raised questions that have never been fully resolved. Formaldehyde is effective at destroying surface and shallow subsurface spores, but its penetration into compacted soil at depth is limited. The 1990 declaration was based on soil sampling from defined test plots, not a comprehensive survey of every square meter of the island's surface. Some researchers have noted that the sampling methodology, while defensible by the standards of the time, would not meet current biosafety verification protocols. Bacillus anthracis spores have been recovered from soil samples in the American Midwest dating to contamination events from the early 20th century, 80–90 years later. The organism's persistence is not theoretical. It is documented across multiple continents. The Sverdlovsk anthrax incident of 1979, a Soviet military facility leak that killed between 64 and 100 people, demonstrated what uncontrolled anthrax release looks like in a populated area. Grunard was not Sverdlovsk, but the underlying science is the same science. The island is technically accessible today. It appears on nautical charts without restriction. Tourists have landed on it and posted photographs online. Grunard Bay is a legitimate kayaking destination. The warning signs are gone. Paul Fildes died in 1971, long before the decontamination program began, and long before the full scope of what his team had created became public knowledge. His wartime biological warfare work remained classified for decades. The citations in his scientific obituaries discuss his contributions to bacteriology without mentioning the anthrax program at all. The 5 million Type F bomblets that were manufactured and never used, incinerated at Porton Down at the end of the war, left no official record of their destruction in publicly available archives. The documentation of the incineration process, the specific site, the dates, classified for decades, partially released, partially still withheld under national security provisions. Operation Vegetarian's planning documents were not declassified until 1997. By that point, the scientists who designed it were dead. The politicians who authorized it were dead. The farmers whose land would have been targeted across the Rhine-Elbe corridor were old men, or also dead, with no knowledge that their fields had once been plotted on British Air Ministry maps as coordinates for a biological strike. The sheep that died on Grunard in the summer of 1942 were never given a designation in any public document. They appear in the scientific records as experimental subjects, noted by distance from the detonation point and time to death. No unit numbers, no names. They were the first living things to confirm that the weapon functioned as designed. There is a soil survey from 1943, still partially redacted in its publicly available version, that contains a line, in plain bureaucratic language, noting that the island should be considered a permanent biological hazard zone for the foreseeable future. The scientist who wrote that line was estimating in decades. They may have been underestimating. The island is still there. The soil is still there. Whether everything in it is gone, truly gone, completely gone, is a question that no one currently has the budget, the political will, or perhaps the courage to answer definitively. The next weapon on this list never touched the ground at all. What it did to the men who carried it never made it into a single official casualty report.